Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me.
Welcome. This isn't a bit of an update video to what I did almost 2 weeks ago. Talk about the upcoming Tamron 50mm to 400mm f4.5 to f6.3 lens. When I did the previous video, we only really knew the full name of the lens and had a leaked image. However, this past week, Tamron have not only confirmed that this lens is for Sony full frame cameras, which I'm really glad about, but also this is in development for an expected release date of sometime in the fall of 2022, which, to be honest, in my opinion, we're probably looking around October at least, I would say. October, maybe even get into November, depending on what they consider fall, but certainly around that time. We have got 11 points of information that have been given out by Tamron in the press kit that they released. I've seen it at a couple of different websites, including Sony Alpha Rumors. So I'm going to go through these 11 pieces. The last two I'll throw in together because they're really only just saying that this lens is compatible with Sony cameras and Sony cameras features. But we do know quite a bit more about this lens now, and so I'll go run through them, talk about them, and what I think of them. Number one, expansive 8 times zoom ratio, starts at 50mm and extends to 400mm. Ultra telephoto with a single lens. That is one of the things, obviously, that is really interesting me to get this lens. It's certainly one that I'm looking to add to my kit bag, because that's a very, very versatile focal range. 350mm. I know some of the specs of this lens, people will write it off immediately. I'm more than happy to wait till the reviews come out, hopefully like Chronos Photo, DP Review, who have covered a lot of Tamron lenses. Many of the big name YouTube reviewers hopefully will get it in their hands within the next few months, and we'll be able to see how this lens performs. But it's certainly very versatile. I'll talk about birds and wildlife and stuff in a little bit, because there's another bit that I actually mentioned on the previous video, which I'm really happy to see included. But certainly I think that is kind of where this lens is aimed at. But I think I saw Stefan Malik's video about this lens after it was announced, and I have to agree with him. There's various different situations that this lens could be used for: street photography, birds and wildlife, and various different ways. I will mention actually the aperture, because it's not mentioned. Looking at my listing again, it's not mentioned on any of the rest of the or any of the actual points. But f4.5 to 6.3 is the aperture range of this lens. Doesn't really put me off this lens. I quite often, for a lot of my photography, use the Sony 24 to 240, and normally I'm at the longer range of that lens, and that is normally often between 4.5 and 6.3, quite often actually at 6.3. So for the aperture, really doesn't bother me personally. I think obviously if you're looking for a faster aperture type of lens, you'll look at Tamron's 35 to 150, which is, I believe, f2 to f2.8. And there are various other lenses, primes and stuff that you can look at for faster aperture in this sort of range. I know Sony apparently have just released, or are releasing, a 400mm f2.8 lens. I've not watched the reviews of on YouTube of that lens, because I've been out and about and busy last couple of days, but I have seen a couple of reviewers have got that in their hands. And so that would be something more you would be leaning towards if you're wanting that very fast aperture. Number two, unfaltering high image quality across the entire zoom range. Again, Tamron have come into the Sony full frame lens marketplace over the last couple of years and put out some really well received and well reviewed lenses. I'm looking forward to seeing the reviews and seeing what the image quality is like. Hopefully it's very good. I'm sure Tamron won't want to torpedo themselves in terms of putting out a less than substandard product, or substandard, or less than that product right now. I'm sure it'll be very good. I have the Tamron 28 to 75 f2.8 first generation. I was using it just yesterday and I was very happy with the image quality. In fact, I've been looking at perhaps even adding the 28 to 200 millimeter lens to my kit bag, which I may forego if this lens is fairly decent. I may forego that. It depends, but certainly Tamron lenses have been very good so far. VXD produces high speed and high precision AF. VXD is one of the motors that focus motors that Tamron uses. Again, been very well received. Equipped with Tamron's proprietary VC image stabilization. This is one of the switches on the lens. There are 3 in total. Having vibration compensation at the longer focal length, especially around about 400 millimeters, is very handy, very useful, especially in places like if it's wind, or even just the movement of, again, birds, wildlife, or whatever you're photographing. You know, the tiniest movement can knock your composition out a lot. So, you really need vibration compensation. A lot of the Tamron lenses for Sony have been very streamlined. They don't have VC built into it, relying on Sony's steady shot. But it's very useful to have that on lens. They've got it on the 35 to 150. I'll have to look up on YouTube, see whether anybody's reviewed the VC on that lens. But again, having some kind of help of just steady being of the vibration compensation on a lens like this at these focal ranges, very, very useful. Enhanced operational and versatile features. Number 5's got a couple of different bits. Connector port for the Tamron utility. This is something that second part is something that I mentioned in the previous video. New focus limiter function added to the Tamron lens utility. On this lens, the 50 to 400 millimeter, this does have a custom switch which looks like it's got 2 or 3, probably 3 positions that it could be in. And I said it in a previous video that this lens could be very useful for things like birds and wildlife, because especially in terms of apertures, I've been using my Sigma 150 to 600 and I've been in a lot at like f8 or f9, and that's just at small local ponds, and you get a lot of the wildlife YouTube videos about lenses, talk about being at like the kind of darker apertures, slower apertures of f8 or 9 or 11 or something for birds and wildlife, so you can get them in focus. And so I think, being able to have that focus limiter on your lens will be very helpful in terms of focus speed overall. I said that it would be great for this custom button to be able to be used as a focus limiter, and that's seemingly what Tamron are doing. They're adding the focus limiter function to the Tamron lens utility. I'm not sure about what buttons or switches the 35 to 150 has, whether you can use that with that also, but certainly it's something that could be very handy. Again, 400 millimeters, you're talking that longer telephoto range. One of the most common uses is birds and wildlife. Rapid zoom ring rotation arc is just 75 degrees. I presume that means that you only have to turn the zoom ring 75 degrees to go from 50 to 400 millimeters. That's not very much at all. It's a very quick snap from 50 to 400 millimeters. I'm genuinely looking to see how that works, how smooth it is. It's not 75 degrees is not very much at all. Honestly, some bigger telephoto lenses, you've got to keep turning the zoom ring to zoom in or out. So that could be very useful. I'm sure hopefully it'll just be a case of, like a lot of cameras and lenses, some manufacturers, their zoom rings or focus rings turn different ways. So I'm sure it would, and I'm hopeful it would just be a case of getting used to it. Optional tripod mount, which is Arcus Swiss compatible. A lot of people seem to demand that these days. Super compact with a length of only 183.4 millimeters, 7.2 inches, and a weight of 1,155 grams or 40.7 ounces. Now I'm estimating that this is when the lens is zoomed out to 50 millimeters, so it's all, so zoomed out is all compact. This is the lens that's most compact, because later on it says that there's a zoom lock switch. So obviously this is an external zoom lens. I wouldn't expect it otherwise, especially this looks more towards a budget kind of lens that they're aiming at. So 7.2 inches, that's not too bad. We'll see how long it extends to, see what the whole length of the lens once it extends to 400 millimeters. And the weight, 1,155 grams. That's, I've looked it up a couple of days ago. That seems to be in the ballpark figure of a traditional 100 to 400 lens. I think it's roughly around the same as the 35 to 150 that Tamron have previously put out, and I know I'm mentioning that lens a couple of times on this video, but it's around about the same weight as that lens, and so I think it's very, to be honest, again, that 24 to 240, that's around about 800 grams in weight, so there's not too much more. It's a lot less than the Sigma lens that I've got, that 150-600, so I think very easily walkabout lens to use. I don't think people should have any issue with it. Half macro photography with a magnification ratio 1:2 at the 50mm setting. I might try that out. I've been thinking, I've tried macro kind of stuff with a couple of lenses recently. Didn't really work, probably because the way that I was trying it, the way that I was doing it. Maybe have to look up. I did have thought previously about buying a macro lens, but I don't think it's really my style. But if you're into it, maybe that will be very useful. New design with improved texture and scratch resistance. From all I've seen, Tamron lenses have really stood up really well to a lot of use and wear and tear. I've used my 28 to 75 first generation a lot, and it seems perfectly okay. 67mm filter size, same as most other Tamron lenses, apart from, again, that 35 to 150, I think some's like 72mm, but typical size for Tamron lenses. The last couple, again, are very just compatible with Sony cameras, so I'll just read them out once. User-friendly features, moisture resistance construction, fluorine coating, that zoom lock switch, etc. It does say actually etc. Compatibility with many camera-specific features and functions, including fast hybrid AF and IAF. So this lens does look like it could be a very decent lens. Again, the focal range from 50 to 400mm. That's a very versatile focal range that could be very handy. Again, to be honest, my thinking on this lens, this is aimed at, again, more budget. I'll get to the price in a second, but I think it is certainly still more aimed. Even though we know more information, I definitely think this is aimed at more slightly. And I know Tamron have got their 150 to 500, so this does seem maybe a slightly bit of an odd choice to put out there, but maybe they just want to cover their bases. They want a lot of different and similar and overlapping focal lengths, and obviously Tamron are becoming one of the real good manufacturer of Sony full frame lenses. Third party Sony lenses, obviously. I think this lens is aimed, as I said, about from typical birds and wildlife photographers, hobbyists. Certainly, it's not a professional lens. Obviously with the aperture, but I think that this is a really good and very versatile range. I mean, normally we get 100 to 400, and to be honest, I fully expect, even with the 150 to 400, to the 150 to 500, I kind of expected them to come out again just to cover the bases with a 100 to 400. And I was thinking even maybe waiting to that till that comes out, and maybe having that. And I don't know. I was still. It is slightly small. I don't. I was thinking really seriously about getting the Tamron 150 to 500. I didn't end up getting that because I wanted that slightly longer focal range of 600, and just for the way the price worked out in the UK. To be honest, when I bought it, I saved a couple £100 anyway. So I ended up with a Sigma 150 to 600. But for a smaller walkabout telephoto, this seems like a genuinely good option. Hopefully, again, once the reviews come in, it will prove good. For price, I still think about £1,000 to £1,200. I think any higher than that will price themselves out of the market a little bit. I've still got a lot of saving up to do to get this lens, but I certainly think around about that kind of range would be good. It's not, especially because of the aperture, it's not going to be around the price mark of that. Again mentioning it, 35 to 150, which is about 1,700 roughly pounds in the UK. I think it'd be about 1,000 to 1,200. Hopefully around about 1,000. That would be perfect. So this is potentially a really good lens. I'm hoping it's a decently performing lens. Hopefully Tamron have put their time and their expertise into this lens, so it's a really good performance lens. And if the reviews are positive, if I think it is worth a gamble, which right now I am certainly thinking it is worth investing in. That's my thoughts right now. We'll see when it comes out. As I said, I think that'll be around about October at least, depending on, hopefully there'll be a good supply to this lens. I'm certainly looking to add this to my kit bag. So it's certainly looking, again, potentially very versatile in its focal length, okay in its aperture range, but what I think people will be looking out from this lens, I definitely think it's one that could pique quite a few hobbyists and general photographers' interest.